famously prefaces Huckleberry Finn, that fountainhead of American coming-of-age novels, with a stern notice that amounts to a keep-out sign for literary critics, for the likes of me. Persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot. By order of the author. Well, fortunately for me and my interpretive tribe, Nicholas Kokonis is of a much milder bent. But he does, like Mr. Clemens before him, spell out his own reservations about the reductionism and artificiality that crouch close, as sin did Keynes, to every literary critic's door. Late in Book 2 of Out of Arcadia, Angelo takes a summer course, An Introduction to Literature, from a Professor Nuth. Thrilled to study under a real writer, and awakened perhaps for the first time to the dream of authoring a story about Arcadia and its struggling people, Angelo hears never to forget the following: read what you like, regardless of notes and critical comments as to what you ought to seek and find. To read and enjoy good stories is with me the main thing. To analyze the author's style or explain your own enjoyment seems of secondary importance. Well, I agree. Yet, I'm going to spend the next several minutes trying to elucidate some of the key features of author Kokonis' style. And I'm going to try to indicate in a suggestive, not authoritarian way, why this new novel deserves careful and repeated readings, and why, though celebrity of past generations, it speaks so relevantly, even urgently, to the present one. Perhaps the first fact that we have to deal with, if we are to meet author Kokonis on his own terms, is this. Just as the bedrock theme of both his novels is education and its transformative power, he himself writes as a learned and deeply literate individual. Although modest and servant-like in spirit, Arcadia's narrator often sends even bookish readers, knowing only English, scrambling for their dictionaries. His glimpse of a cashier Angelo meets reveals a fat and hirsute woman. Describing Angelo's shaky first day as a busboy in Chicago's Sherman House restaurant, the narrator notices his long underfed hero's chagrin at the scale of affluent America's waste. At times he was tempted to grab a piece of juicy steak and wolf it down, but his Greek philautism prevented him. At the drop of a hat, Tarko, Angelo's irrepressible Cuban friend, quotes Homer in perfect, well-articulated Attic Greek, carries around with him a low classical dictionary, classical library edition of Lysias, and while explaining his wildly polyglot names, mentions offhandedly that he fell in love with Plutarch's Parallel Lives when he was in grade school. Indeed, as we follow these transformative 3 years in Angelo's life and education, we see in almost every chapter his and author Kokonis' passion for learning. But not, as Professor Nuth warns us, the sterile pride of pedantry or the jejune pursuit of analysis for its own sake, For if Kokonis reveres education, he also shows us with fervent conviction that knowledge cut off from life, as surely as does innovation severed from tradition, or the individual separated from family and community, that it stunts, disfigures, and sometimes kills, as these three literally do in the tragic case of Professor Charlotte, the brilliant research psychologist who commits suicide when his career declines and his marriage fails. Now please notice with me what we have encountered in identifying this first and seemingly straightforward feature of Nicholas Kokonis' literary style, and that is his wide-ranging erudition. Please notice with me that this is not in fact a simple fact at all, but on closer scrutiny turns out to be a duality, an array of binaries that is knowing and being, thinking and feeling, openness to change, and rootedness in the past. A series of binaries that to be productive rather than harmful must always exist together and in tension. Identifying and examining another of these signature tensions in Out of Arcadia will, I think, prove particularly helpful. In Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert Pirsig's 1974 novel that went viral well before the denizens of cyberspace coined that phrase, we learn, or hear in freshened terms, that there are two ways of living life and looking at things. Clear-eyed, dispassionate folk see below surfaces to structure. More cognitive than visceral, they refuse to be distracted by multiplicity or mesmerized by sensory richness. It's not that they are unfeeling Philistine clods, intent to replace Chartres Cathedral stained glass windows with thermopane glass. But given the choice, they would rather study the building's architectural drawings than visit there on a muggy afternoon. And if they decide to listen to performed music rather than simply studying scores, well, they'll choose Mozart, Haydn, a Schoenberg tone roll composition, or better still, Elliott Carter. Those, says Pirsig, are the classicists among us. They won't ride Harleys, but they will savor their blueprints. The rest of us, as you guessed it, are the romantics. We read Blake and tolerate Pope. Harleys to us mean wind in our faces and thunder in our ears. We're likelier to appreciate Van Gogh far more than the Dutch realists, and we favor the critical and the satirical over the sentimental. To read Nicholas Kokonis well is to realize how thoroughly he gives Pirsig's neat categories the lie. Well-read and alert readers soon discover that in this kind man and reverential chronicler there lies also a rapier-like wit. In his pride and arrogance, Zephyrus Poupos names his New York restaurant the Epirus Hilltop Palace, spelling out the words on an immense white and blue neon sign across the entire wide front wall. Inside, Zephyrus trumpets the self-congratulatory point even more blatantly with a terracotta statue of ancient Epirus' other most famous son, King Pyrrhus. Just behind the wall, though,